products that we're going to be using today on this design. This is going to be a pretty purple rose eye design, which is wildly popular at parties for all ages. I'm going to start off using a petal sponge, and I'm going to start loading it with a little bit of glitter white, which I'm just going to do on the pointed end of the sponge like this. And then I'm going to start loading a bit of the shimmer green on the rounded end of the sponge. Okay, so then we kind of have like a half and half of both colors on the petal sponge. Okay, starting on the inside corner of her eye, using the pointed end of my sponge with the glitter white, and just start patting it and pouncing it on there and blending it out and upwards towards her temple with the green coming up, just making sure it's got a nice blend. Okay, you can use a baby wipe to clean up any oopsies. All right, then I'm going to flip the same exact sponge on the other side, and I'm just picking up a small amount of shimmer pink. Superstar is quite soft, so I don't really need to add any water, and I'm just kind of creating a touch of pink blush on her cheek. Okay, and then next I'm just gonna spritz with a little bit of bright green glitter while that paint is a bit wet. Okay, next I'm gonna load a 3/4 inch long angled brush by Blazing Brush, and I'm using a purple, blue, and white one stroke. This is a homemade cake that I made myself, but you can find a lot of split cakes with these colors. Just make sure that when you're loading that the white is loaded onto the pointed tip of your brush. On the outside corner of her eye, we're gonna start creating the largest petal of the rose, wiggling and pivoting into a rounded arch shape. The white is always on the outside edge of the rose. Now I'm doing a couple of smaller side petals. All right, and then I'm gonna do another petal stroke, but upside down for a smaller bud on the cheek. And then repeat the rose petals from the outer corner of the eye, just above the beginning of her eyebrow. Okay, large petal and then 2 small ones on each side. And this tiny little flick on the inside corner. Now that we have the first layer of each rose completed, this must dry before we go on to the next layer. While it's drying, I'm going to start some leaves by loading a large round brush with Fab Ocean Shimmer Green. This is one of my absolute favorite green colors. I use it a lot on many of my designs. Okay, I'm gonna load this brush really, really well. Get it nice and saturated. Then we're gonna just start flicking out some simple leaf shapes around each rose. And then we'll just define all of these later by adding some outlining, but just kind of adding a leaf on each side of the roses, maybe a couple of small ones in here on the inside corner of the eye. All right. Now I reload that purple one stroke on my brush, and then we're going to complete the second layer of each rose. Mimicking those outer arched petals, but keeping it smaller and on the inside. Do this for each rose except for the smaller bud. Just connect the outer petal edge with an upside down U shape. Continue doing those half U shapes inside of the other roses. Okay, making sure the white is always on the outside. Doing this small rose bud. Okay, and then we're going to lead with the white and pivot our brush to do some other side petals coming down and in and underneath, kind of closing up these roses. Okay, like that. Okay, I'm going to add a few more leaves just around each rose, trying to balance out the design. Don't forget we're going to define these leaves at the end, doing some outlining. Okay, just a few more little leaves all around the outside of the design like this. Maybe one little one here, peeking on the outside of the rose. That. And then next what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dab a little bit of turquoise glitter onto each of the leaves while it's still a bit wet. Okay, and one tip is to just wet your finger on a wet wipe, and then you can pick up the glitter on the tip of your finger. It'll help the glitter stick so that you can dab it onto the wet leaves. I'm just going to complete these roses a little bit and bring in a couple more inside petals just to finish them off. Now, if you're short on time, you can certainly leave this design exactly the way it is, and it's quite pretty, but we will be outlining it. This is a number 2 Cribble and Round brush, and I'm going to load it up really well with some Global Strong Black, which is what I like to use for all of my outlining and black line work. Always test it on the back of your hand before you start painting, just so you don't get any like heavy blobs of black. And starting with these leaves, using the very tip of the brush, which is nice and pointy, try using a really soft touch for this outline, pressing down a little bit more firmly to get a thicker line, and you can get a nice variance of line work if you go thick and thin, but I like to get these lines as thin as possible, especially going around the roses and coming down from the tips of the leaves. I like to keep it very thin and soft and delicate looking. All right, so using the tip of your brush, going thick to really thin around each leaf. I like to softly flick little lines down each leaf center. I find this definitely makes the design pop quite nicely. And if you didn't have the time to do this line work, like I said, you could have definitely left it and maybe even just added some little white dots around everything. That always looks pretty and kind of gives a softer look if you didn't want to use black. And then you don't have to really do any line work. You're just adding a few dots here and there. So I'm just lightly outlining each rose like this. And all of these little leaves over here. Keep going. Outline everything. Keeping a nice soft touch. Okay. Little flicks down the center of each leaf. These tiny little ones in here. Just lightly. You definitely don't want to go too heavy on the inside of the eye. Okay. Just like that. And then I like to add a couple of little swirls and curls and maybe a few reverse teardrops, kind of down on the outer edge of the cheek here. Some reverse teardrops. Okay, thin to thick pressing down. And then I'll do a little swirl up here, reload my brush. And just some thin lines. And then I like to do a few just black dots kind of in some of the little empty spaces. Maybe right after some of the teardrops. just to fill it in a little, give it a bit of visual interest. Okay, and that's pretty much our design complete. Last but not least, I think we're just going to do some lips here. I use a disposable applicator, and I'm just going to pick up some of the purple paint on my applicator and just apply it to her lips. And then this can just be tossed in the garbage once I'm done with it, without worrying about contaminating any of my brushes on someone's mouth. Getting the lips done. Then I like to dab just a tiny bit of glitter on the bottom lip, just like that. And that's it. That's our pretty purple rose eye design. Thanks you guys for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed this design.